October 21, 1879, 1:30 a.m., Menlo Park Laboratory, New Jersey. Thomas Alva Edison, the 32-year-old inventor whose wild hair and soot-stained apron bear witness to 18 straight hours of meticulous experimentation, watches with exhausted fascination as a thin loop of carbonized cotton thread glows with steady, warm light inside a glass bulb from which he has painstakingly removed every trace of oxygen. The incandescent filament, no thicker than a human hair, has been burning continuously for over 13 hours, longer than any electric light in human history, casting its revolutionary radiance across workbenches cluttered with blown glass tubes, coiled copper wires, and the accumulated debris of nearly 2,000 failed attempts to create practical electric illumination. In this moment, as Edison carefully adjusts the current flowing through his miraculous filament, while assistants Charles Batchelor and Francis Upton record every measurement in leather-bound laboratory notebooks, human civilization stands at the threshold of the modern age, poised to banish the darkness that has limited human activities since the dawn of time. But as Edison monitors the gentle glow that will soon transform every city, every home, every aspect of human life on Earth, he carries within his restless mind and relentless spirit the accumulated ingenuity, mechanical aptitude, and tireless work ethic of ancestors whose own journeys from European workshops to American frontiers have been building toward this moment of technological breakthrough for more than 3 centuries. What ancestral forces converge to create the most prolific inventor in human history? Which bloodlines produced someone capable of imagining and developing technologies that had never existed before? What hereditary gifts of mechanical intuition, experimental persistence, and entrepreneurial vision flowed through the genealogical streams that created Thomas Alva Edison? To understand the man who would transform the modern world through more than 1,000 patented inventions, we must journey backward through the generations that forged his extraordinary capacity for innovation. Through the Dutch workshops where his paternal ancestors mastered the intricate arts of precision craftsmanship and mechanical engineering. Through the Scottish Highlands where his maternal forebears developed the combination of intellectual curiosity and practical problem-solving that would prove essential for technological breakthrough. Through the American frontier communities where these separate family traditions merged and evolved into something uniquely suited to the challenges and opportunities of an industrializing nation. For Thomas Edison was not simply an individual who happened to possess unusual inventive abilities. He was the culmination of centuries of ancestral knowledge about materials, mechanics, and manufacturing, the living embodiment of immigrant determination and technological sophistication that would reshape the relationship between human beings and their physical environment. Thomas Alva Edison entered the world on February 11, 1847, in the modest brick house in Milan, Ohio, born to Samuel Ogden Eddison Jr. and Nancy Matthews Elliott Eddison, whose marriage had united 2 distinct traditions of mechanical expertise and intellectual investigation that would prove perfectly complementary in shaping their son's approach to invention and discovery. Samuel Eddison Jr., born on August 16, 1804, in Digby, Nova Scotia, had inherited from his father's family a rich tradition of mechanical skill and entrepreneurial ambition that stretched back through generations of Dutch craftsmen and English colonists who had carried their technological knowledge across the Atlantic Ocean in search of new opportunities for applying their expertise. Samuel Edison Sr., Thomas's paternal grandfather, had been born on September 18, 1765, in Caldwell, New Jersey, during the tumultuous years that preceded the American Revolution. To parents whose own family histories embodied the complex patterns of European migration and cultural adaptation that had shaped colonial society throughout the British North American territories, Samuel Edison Sr. Ace, father John Eddison, had been born around 1730 in New Jersey to a family of Dutch origin, whose ancestors had been among the skilled craftsmen and merchants who had established the New Amsterdam colony during the early 17th century, bringing with them sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering, precision metalworking, and commercial organization that had made the Dutch Republic one of Europe's most technologically advanced societies. The Eddison family's Dutch roots could be traced back to the village of Edam in North Holland, where Thomas Edison's ancestors had been involved in the cheesemaking and dairy industries that had sustained the Dutch economy for centuries before the development of international maritime trade. Jan Eddison, born around 1620, was among the skilled artisans whose expertise in food preservation and processing made Dutch agricultural products sought after throughout Europe. The techniques that Jan Eddison had mastered, the precise control of temperature and humidity required for cheese aging, the understanding of fermentation processes that enabled long-term food storage, the mechanical innovations that increased productivity in dairy operations, had all reflected the kind of systematic experimental approach that would later characterize his descendant Thomas Edison's method of invention. Jan Eddison's son, Cornelis Eddison, born around 1650, had expanded the family's expertise beyond agriculture into the mechanical trades that were transforming Dutch society during the golden age of the 17th century. Cornelis had apprenticed with master clockmakers in Amsterdam, learning the precision craftsmanship and mathematical understanding that enabled the creation of mechanical timepieces whose accuracy and reliability had revolutionized navigation, astronomy, and commercial life throughout Europe. The skills that Cornelis had developed, the ability to work with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, the understanding of gear ratios and mechanical advantage that enabled complex machines to amplify human effort, the patience and persistence required to perfect mechanisms through countless iterations of design and testing, had established patterns of thinking and working that would be transmitted through subsequent generations of Edison craftsmen. The decision by Cornelis Edison's son, Thomas Edison, born around 1675, to emigrate to New Amsterdam, later New York, had represented not just economic opportunity, but also technological migration, as he had brought to America sophisticated mechanical knowledge that was relatively rare in the colonial environment. Thomas Edison had established himself as a millwright and mechanical engineer, applying Dutch hydraulic engineering techniques to the construction of water-powered mills and mechanical systems that served colonial communities throughout the Hudson River Valley. His expertise in designing and building complex mechanical systems had made him one of the most valued craftsmen in colonial New York, while also providing him with the economic success necessary to establish his family among the prosperous merchant and artisan classes of colonial society. Thomas Edison's son, John Eddison, born around 1700, had inherited not just his father's mechanical skills, but also his entrepreneurial instincts, establishing himself as a manufacturer of precision instruments and mechanical devices that served the growing colonial economy. John Edison's workshop had produced surveying instruments, navigation tools, and mechanical clocks whose quality and reliability had earned him customers throughout the colonial Atlantic coast. His understanding of metallurgy, precision machining, and mechanical design had reflected the accumulated knowledge of 3 generations of Dutch craftsmen who had maintained and refined their expertise through careful attention to detail and systematic experimentation with new materials and techniques. The marriage of John Eddison to Sarah Ogden around 1725 had brought together 2 family traditions that would prove crucial in shaping the technological orientation of their descendants. Sarah Ogden was born around 1705 to a family of English Quakers who had emigrated to New Jersey during the late 17th century, bringing with them not just religious convictions, but also practical knowledge of agriculture, manufacturing, and community organization that had made Quaker settlements among the most prosperous and technologically advanced communities in colonial America. The Ogden family had been particularly known for their innovations in agricultural machinery and water management systems that had enabled them to achieve remarkable productivity on their New Jersey farms. Sarah Ogden's father, Samuel Ogden, born around 1680, had inherited from his own parents a combination of English agricultural knowledge and Quaker philosophical principles that had shaped his approach to technological innovation and community development. The Ogden family had been among the English families who had supported Parliament during the English Civil War, demonstrating their commitment to religious and political principles that emphasized individual conscience, community responsibility, and systematic improvement of social and economic conditions. These principles had influenced their approach to technology and innovation, leading them to view mechanical improvements not just as means for personal enrichment, but as ways to benefit entire communities and advance human welfare. Samuel Ogden's marriage to Elizabeth Wheeler around 1704 had united two English Quaker families whose combined expertise in agriculture, manufacturing, and community organization had made them leaders in the development of New Jersey's colonial economy. Elizabeth Wheeler had been born around 1685 to a family that had emigrated from Yorkshire, bringing with them a sophisticated understanding of textile production, sheep farming, and wool processing that had enabled them to establish successful manufacturing operations in the colonies. The Wheeler family's expertise in organizing complex production processes that required coordination of multiple skilled workers had provided models for industrial organization that would prove valuable as colonial society evolved toward more sophisticated manufacturing. The son of Samuel Ogden and Elizabeth Wheeler, John Ogden, born around 1710, had inherited from both sides of his family tree the combination of technical expertise and systematic thinking that would characterize multiple generations of the Ogden lineage. John Ogden had become one of colonial New Jersey's most successful manufacturers, establishing mills and workshops that produced textiles, tools, and mechanical devices for customers throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. His success had been based not just on traditional craft skills, but also on innovations in production methods, quality control, and business organization that had enabled him to compete successfully with European manufacturers, while also developing distinctly American approaches to technology and Bassett's industry. When John Eddison married Sarah Ogden, their union had combined Dutch mechanical expertise with English Quaker principles and agricultural knowledge, creating a family culture that emphasized both technological innovation and ethical responsibility. Their son Samuel Eddison Uchu, Thomas Edison's grandfather, had inherited from both family traditions a sophisticated understanding of mechanical systems, an appreciation for systematic experimentation, and a commitment to using technological knowledge for practical improvement of human conditions. These qualities had been reinforced by his upbringing in colonial New Jersey, where the interaction of diverse European technological traditions had created an environment particularly conducive to innovation and adaptation. Samuel Eddison, S.R. Childhood during the 1770s and 1780s had exposed him to the full impact of the American Revolution on colonial society, providing him with first-hand experience of how political and social disruption could create both challenges and opportunities for technological innovation. The war had disrupted traditional trade relationships and supply chains, forcing colonial manufacturers to develop new sources of materials and new production methods that could operate independently of European suppliers. Samuel Edison Sr. had observed how American craftsmen had responded to these challenges by adapting European techniques to local conditions and resources, creating distinctly American approaches to manufacturing that emphasized flexibility, resourcefulness, and practical problem-solving. The political principles that had motivated American independence had also influenced Samuel Edison S.R.A.'s understanding of the relationship between technological innovation and social progress. The revolutionary ideology that had emphasized individual liberty, democratic self-governance, and improvement of social conditions had encouraged American inventors and manufacturers to view their work not just as means for personal advancement, but as contributions to the broader project of creating a more just and prosperous society. This connection between technological innovation and social improvement would become one of the most distinctive characteristics of American industrial development during the 19th century, and it would profoundly influence the approach to invention that Samuel Edison Sr. would pass on to his descendants. Samuel Edison Sr. His marriage to Nancy Simpson around 1790 had brought together his family's tradition of mechanical expertise with another lineage that had preserved important knowledge about materials science and manufacturing processes. Nancy Simpson had been born around 1770 to a family of Scottish immigrants who had brought to America a sophisticated understanding of textile production, chemical processes, and precision craftsmanship that had been developed in the workshops and factories of Scotland's emerging industrial economy. The Simpson family had been among the Scottish families who had emigrated to America during the late 18th century in search of opportunities to apply their technical knowledge in a society that offered greater social mobility and economic freedom than was available in Britain's rigid class system. Nancy Simpson's father, Robert Simpson, born around 1745, had inherited from his own Scottish ancestors expertise in the metalworking trades that had made Scotland one of Europe's most important centers for the production of precision tools and mechanical devices. The Simpson family had been based in the region around Glasgow, where the intersection of abundant coal deposits, skilled craftsmen, and entrepreneurial capital had created one of the world's first industrial economies. Robert Simpson had apprenticed with master blacksmiths and toolmakers who had developed innovative techniques for working with iron and steel that had enabled them to produce tools and machinery of unprecedented quality and precision. The knowledge that Robert Simpson had brought to America had included not just traditional blacksmithing skills, but also an understanding of the chemical processes that governed metallurgy, the mathematical principles that determined optimal design for mechanical devices, and the organizational methods that enabled efficient production of complex manufactured goods. His emigration to America had been motivated partly by economic opportunity, but also by his desire to escape the social restrictions that had limited opportunities for advancement within Britain's traditional craft guild system. In America, he had found opportunities to apply his knowledge in new ways and to develop innovations that might not have been possible within the more conservative environment of Scottish industry. Robert Simpson's marriage to Margaret Stuart around 1770 had united two Scottish families whose combined expertise had encompassed virtually every aspect of pre-industrial manufacturing and craftsmanship. Margaret Stuart was born around 1750 to a family that had been involved in the chemical industries that had developed around Glasgow during the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. The Stuart family had possessed specialized knowledge of the processes used to produce soap, candles, dyes, and other chemical products that had been essential for both domestic use and industrial applications. Their understanding of chemical reactions, temperature control, and quality testing had provided them with scientific knowledge that had been relatively rare in 18th century society. The marriage of Robert Simpson and Margaret Stuart had thus combined mechanical expertise with chemical knowledge, creating a family culture that emphasized both practical craftsmanship and systematic understanding of the scientific principles that govern manufacturing processes. Their daughter Nancy, who would become Samuel Edison Sr.'s wife and Thomas Edison's grandmother, had inherited from both sides of her family tree a sophisticated understanding of materials science, manufacturing processes, and quality control that would prove crucial in shaping the technological orientation of the Edison family lineage. Samuel Edison Sr. Success as a manufacturer and inventor during the early years of American independence had demonstrated the power of combining European technical knowledge with American entrepreneurial opportunity and democratic social conditions. His workshops had produced a wide range of mechanical devices and precision instruments that had served the growing American economy, while his innovations in production methods and business organization had established him as one of the leading manufacturers in New Jersey. His success had provided the economic foundation for his family's continued prosperity, while also enabling him to invest in the education and training that would prepare his children for leadership roles in America's developing industrial economy. The son of Samuel Eddison Sr. and Nancy Simpson, Samuel Eddison Jr., Thomas's father, had been born into a family environment that combined technological sophistication with political awareness and social responsibility. Samuel Jr.'s childhood during the early years of the 19th century had exposed him to the rapid changes that were transforming American society as the new nation developed its own distinctive economic and political institutions. The workshops and mills that his father had operated had provided Samuel Jr. with practical education in manufacturing and mechanical engineering, while the family's involvement in community affairs had taught him about the relationships between technological innovation and social progress. Samuel Eddison Jr.'s political involvement during the 1830s, particularly his support for the unsuccessful rebellion against British rule in Canada, had reflected his family's traditional commitment to democratic principles and individual liberty. But it had also demonstrated the potential costs of political activism in an era of international tension and domestic instability. His forced flight from Canada to the United States following the failure of the Mackenzie Rebellion had required him to rebuild his life and career in a new country. But it had also provided him with experience of adaptation and resilience that would prove valuable in dealing with the challenges and opportunities of American frontier life. Samuel Eddison Jr.'s establishment of various business enterprises in Ohio during the 1840s had reflected both his inherited understanding of manufacturing and commerce and his ability to identify and capitalize upon emerging opportunities in America's rapidly developing Western territories. His involvement in lighthouse construction, lumber operations, and grain trading had demonstrated the diversity of skills and knowledge that he had inherited from multiple generations of craftsmen and entrepreneurs. While his success in these varied enterprises had provided the economic stability necessary for raising and educating his children in an environment that encouraged curiosity, experimentation, and intellectual development. The marriage of Samuel Eddison Jr. to Nancy Matthews Elliott on September 12, 1828, had brought together the Edison family's tradition of mechanical expertise, approach to invention and discovery. Nancy Elliott was born on April 4, 1810, in Chenango County, New York, to a family whose Scottish and English ancestors had preserved and transmitted a sophisticated understanding of education, scientific investigation, and systematic thinking that would provide Thomas Edison with the intellectual tools and methods that were essential for his later success as an inventor. Nancy Elliott's father, Ebenezer Matthews Elliott, had been born on October 15, 1783, in Connecticut, to parents whose own family histories embodied the intellectual traditions and scientific curiosity that had characterized the best aspects of colonial and early American educational culture. Ebenezer Elliott's father, John Elliott, had been born around 1750 in Connecticut to a family of Scottish Presbyterian ministers and teachers who had brought to America not just religious convictions, but also commitment to education and intellectual development that had made Presbyterian communities among the most literate and scientifically sophisticated populations in colonial society. The Elliott family's Scottish roots could be traced back to the border region between Scotland and England, where their ancestors had been involved in the intellectual and religious movements that had shaped Scottish culture during the 16th and 17th centuries. Thomas Elliott, born around 1680, had been among the Scottish Presbyterian ministers who had played crucial roles in establishing educational institutions and promoting scientific learning during the period when Scotland was developing one of Europe's most advanced educational systems. The Scottish commitment to democratic education, which had emphasized that all children, regardless of social class, deserved access to learning, had created a cultural environment that had produced remarkable numbers of inventors, scientists, and intellectual leaders. Thomas Elliott's son, William Elliott, born around 1715, had inherited not just his father's commitment to education, but also his interest in the scientific revolution that was transforming European understanding of natural phenomena. William Eliot had been among the Scottish intellectuals who had been influenced by the work of Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, and other pioneers of the modern scientific method, developing an understanding of experimental investigation and systematic observation that enabled significant advances in agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. His emigration to America during the 1740s had been motivated partly by religious considerations, but also by his desire to participate in the intellectual and scientific developments that were occurring in colonial society. William Eliot's establishment of schools and educational institutions in Connecticut had reflected his understanding that American society offered unprecedented opportunities for implementing educational innovations and scientific investigation. His teaching methods had emphasized practical application of theoretical knowledge, encouraging students to conduct experiments and develop mechanical devices that could solve real-world problems. This approach to education, which had combined scientific learning with practical application, had created intellectual traditions that had been transmitted through subsequent generations of the Eliot family, and that would prove crucial in shaping Thomas Edison's approach to invention and discovery. The marriage of William Eliot to Sarah McNeill around 1745 had brought together two Scottish families whose combined expertise had encompassed virtually every aspect of 18th-century intellectual and practical knowledge. Sarah McNeill had been born around 1720 to a family of Scottish physicians and natural philosophers who had been involved in the scientific developments that had made Scotland one of Europe's leading centers for medical education and scientific research. The McNeill family had possessed a sophisticated understanding of anatomy, chemistry, and experimental method that had enabled them to make significant contributions to medical knowledge and practice. Sarah McNeill's father, Alexander McNeill, born around 1695, had been among the Scottish physicians who had been influenced by the work of Hermann Boerhaave and other pioneers of modern medical science, developing an understanding of physiological processes and therapeutic methods that had represented significant advances over traditional medical practice. His knowledge of chemistry and pharmacology had enabled him to develop new treatments and medications that had been more effective than conventional remedies, while his commitment to systematic observation and experimental testing had established methods of medical investigation that had influenced subsequent generations of Scottish physicians. The union of William Eliot and Sarah McNeill had thus combined educational expertise with medical and scientific knowledge, creating a family culture that had emphasized both theoretical learning and practical application, both intellectual curiosity and systematic investigation. Their son John Eliot, Thomas Edison's great-grandfather, had inherited from both sides of his family tree a sophisticated understanding of scientific method, educational theory, and practical problem-solving that had made him one of the most respected teachers and intellectual leaders in colonial Connecticut. John Eliot's career as an educator during the Revolutionary period had provided him with opportunities to develop and implement educational innovations that had prepared American students for the intellectual and practical challenges of building a new nation. His teaching methods had emphasized the connection between scientific learning and technological application, encouraging students to view education not just as the acquisition of abstract knowledge, but as preparation for solving real-world problems and improving social conditions. The son of John Eliot and Martha Scott, Ebenezer Matthews Eliot, had been born into a family environment that had combined intellectual sophistication with practical knowledge and had emphasized the importance of education, scientific investigation, and technological innovation as means for individual advancement and social progress. Ebenezer Eliot's childhood during the Revolutionary period had exposed him to the intellectual ferment and social transformation that had accompanied the creation of American independence, providing him with an understanding of how scientific knowledge and technological innovation could contribute to the broader project of building a more just and prosperous society. Ebenezer Elliott's career as a teacher and community leader during the early years of American independence had demonstrated his ability to combine his inherited intellectual traditions with the practical needs of American society. His educational methods had emphasized the connection between theoretical learning and practical application, encouraging students to view science and technology not as abstract subjects, but as tools for solving real-world problems and improving human conditions. His success in preparing students for careers in science, engineering, and manufacturing had established him as one of the most respected educators in New York State, while also providing his own children with educational opportunities that had prepared them for leadership roles in American society. The marriage of Ebenezer Elliott to Rebecca Smith around 1805 had brought together his family's intellectual traditions with another lineage that had preserved important knowledge about education, scientific investigation, and community organization. Rebecca Smith had been born around 1785 to a family of Connecticut educators who had been involved in the development of American educational institutions and methods during the early years of national independence. The Smith family had been particularly known for their innovations in educational theory and practice that had emphasized the importance of systematic observation, experimental investigation, and practical application as essential components of effective learning. Rebecca Smith's father, Samuel Smith, born around 1760, had been among the American educators who had been influenced by the work of Johann Pestalozzi and other European educational reformers, developing an understanding of child development and learning theory that had enabled significant improvements in educational methods and outcomes. His establishment of schools and teacher training programs had reflected his understanding that American society offered unprecedented opportunities for implementing educational innovations that could prepare citizens for participation in democratic institutions and the industrial economy. The union of Ebenezer Elliott and Rebecca Smith had thus combined two family traditions that had emphasized education, scientific investigation, and systematic thinking as essential tools for individual development and social progress. Their daughter Nancy Matthews Elliott, who would become Samuel Eddison Jr.'s wife and Thomas Edison's mother, had inherited from both sides of her family tree a sophisticated understanding of learning theory, scientific method, and systematic investigation that would prove crucial in shaping Thomas Edison's approach to invention and discovery. Nancy Elliott's childhood during the 1810s and 1820s had provided her with exposure to the intellectual and educational developments that were transforming American society as the new nation developed its own distinctive cultural and scientific institutions. Her education had emphasized not just traditional academic subjects, but also practical skills and scientific knowledge that had prepared her for the challenges and opportunities of life in America's rapidly developing Western territory. Her understanding of educational theory and practice had enabled her to provide her own children with learning experiences that had encouraged curiosity, experimentation, and systematic investigation of natural phenomena. When Thomas Alva Edison was born to Samuel and Nancy Edison in 1847, he had inherited from both sides of his family tree a remarkable combination of mechanical expertise, scientific knowledge, and systematic thinking that would prove perfectly suited to the challenges and opportunities of America's industrializing economy. From his father's Dutch and English ancestors, he had inherited a sophisticated understanding of mechanical systems, precision craftsmanship, and manufacturing processes that had been developed and refined through generations of skilled craftsmen and innovative entrepreneurs. From his mother's Scottish and English ancestors, he had inherited intellectual curiosity, scientific methodology, and systematic approaches to learning and investigation that had been preserved and transmitted through generations of educators and natural philosophers. The combination of these ancestral traditions had created in Thomas Edison not just the intellectual tools necessary for invention and discovery, but also the cultural framework that had viewed technological innovation as both individual opportunity and social responsibility. His understanding that inventions should solve practical problems and improve human conditions had reflected ancestral traditions that had emphasized the connection between technological knowledge and community welfare, while his systematic approach to experimentation and development had demonstrated the influence of scientific methodology and educational theory that had been transmitted through his mother's family lineage. Thomas Edison's childhood in Ohio and Michigan during the 1850s provided him with opportunities to observe and participate in the technological developments that were transforming American society during the mid-19th century. The construction of railroads, telegraph lines, and industrial facilities had created demand for mechanical innovation and engineering expertise that had offered unprecedented opportunities for young people with technical aptitude and entrepreneurial ambition. Edison's early experiments with chemistry and mechanical devices had reflected not just natural curiosity, but also his inherited understanding of systematic investigation and practical application that had enabled him to learn from both success and failure. The informal education that Thomas Edison had received from his mother, Nancy, following his brief and unsuccessful experience in formal schooling, had demonstrated the power of educational methods that had emphasized individual curiosity and systematic investigation rather than rote memorization and standardized curriculum. Nancy Edison's understanding of learning theory and child development had enabled her to create educational experiences that had encouraged her son's natural interests, while also providing him with the intellectual tools necessary for independent learning and investigation. Her approach to education had reflected the influence of generations of Elliott family educators who had understood that effective learning required adaptation to individual abilities and interests, rather than rigid adherence to predetermined methods and content. Thomas Edison's early career as a telegraph operator during the 1860s had provided him with practical experience of the most advanced communication technology of his era, while also exposing him to the broader network of technological innovation and industrial development that was reshaping the American economy and society. His work in telegraph offices throughout the Midwest had enabled him to observe how complex technological systems operated, while also providing him with opportunities to experiment with improvements and modifications that could enhance system performance and reliability. His innovations in telegraph technology during this period had demonstrated both his inherited understanding of mechanical systems and his ability to identify and solve practical problems through systematic experimentation. The establishment of Edison's research laboratory at Menlo Park in 1876 represented the culmination of centuries of ancestral preparation for technological innovation and scientific investigation. The laboratory's emphasis on systematic experimentation, collaborative research, and practical application had reflected the influence of educational traditions that had emphasized scientific methodology and systematic investigation, while its focus on developing commercially viable technologies had demonstrated the influence of entrepreneurial traditions that had viewed innovation as a means for individual advancement and community benefit. The invention of the phonograph in 1877 had demonstrated Edison's ability to combine theoretical understanding of acoustic principles with practical knowledge of mechanical systems and materials science, creating a device that had captured and reproduced sound in ways that had never before been achieved. The development process had required not just individual genius but also systematic investigation of materials, mechanical configurations, and acoustic properties that had drawn upon generations of accumulated knowledge about precision manufacturing, experimental method, and quality control. As Thomas Edison worked through the night of October 21, 1879, refining the incandescent light bulb that would transform human civilization, he was drawing upon not just his own individual talents, but also the accumulated wisdom and expertise of all those ancestral traditions that had been building toward this moment of breakthrough. The Dutch precision craftsmanship that had enabled him to create mechanical systems of unprecedented reliability. The Scottish scientific methodology that had guided his systematic investigation of materials and design options. The English educational traditions that had provided him with intellectual tools for learning and problem-solving. All of these ancestral gifts had converged in the mind and hands of someone who possessed both the opportunity and the ability to transform technological possibility into practical reality. The successful test of the incandescent light bulb on that October night had represented not just individual achievement, but also ancestral vindication, proving that centuries of accumulated knowledge and expertise could be combined and applied in ways that would benefit all humanity. The electric light that glowed steadily in Edison's laboratory was the culmination of generations of mechanical innovation, scientific investigation, and systematic experimentation that had finally found their perfect expression in someone who understood that technological innovation was not just about creating new devices, but about improving the conditions of human life. The electric power systems that Edison would develop during the following decade, transforming the incandescent light bulb from laboratory curiosity into practical illumination for millions of people, would demonstrate the influence of organizational and entrepreneurial traditions that had taught him to view invention not as an end in itself, but as the beginning of larger processes of technological development and social transformation. His understanding of how to design, manufacture, and distribute complex technological systems had reflected ancestral knowledge about manufacturing, commerce, and community organization that had been preserved and transmitted through generations of craftsmen, educators, and entrepreneurs who had understood that individual innovation must be combined with collective effort to achieve lasting impact. The Thomas Edison, who emerged from his laboratory on the morning of October 22, 1879, carrying with him the knowledge that he had finally solved the problem of practical electric lighting, was not simply an individual inventor who had achieved a remarkable breakthrough, but the culmination of centuries of ancestral preparation for this moment of technological transformation. The Dutch mechanical expertise, the Scottish scientific methodology, the English educational traditions, the American entrepreneurial opportunity. All of these influences had converged to create someone capable of imagining and creating technologies that would reshape the modern world while also establishing methods of systematic innovation that would enable continued technological progress for generations to come. The more than 1,000 patents that Thomas Edison would eventually receive, covering everything from electric power generation and distribution to motion picture technology and industrial chemistry, would represent not just individual achievement, but also the flowering of ancestral traditions that had been building toward this explosion of technological creativity for centuries. Each invention would demonstrate the influence of specific ancestral knowledge and methods, while also contributing to the broader project of applying scientific knowledge and mechanical expertise to the improvement of human conditions and the advancement of civilization itself.